Okay, thank you, Jihan. Remind y'all, my name is Ali Issa. I'm the National Field Organizer for War Resisters League, whose one of their slogans is resisting the war at home and abroad since 1923. So it seemed like a fitting event to participate in. I'm also the co-coordinator of the War Resisters League's Facing Tear Gas campaign, which tries to use tear gas as a window into the broader process of domestic U.S. militarization, as well as kind of support for global militarization. But before I talk about what's happening domestically with the militarization of the police and everyday life, and how that relates to, I think, a vast potential for movement building against that militarization, as well as alliance building between existing groups, I want to give you two quotes that might illuminate us a little. So in January 2012, we helped organize an event that was the first year anniversary of the Egyptian Revolution, during which we had a speaker that was working on Stop and Frisk here in New York City named Jamel Mims. And in describing Stop and Frisk, as well as kind of police tactics more generally in the U.S., he called them the counter-insurgency before the insurgency. So we'll maybe dig into that a little more shortly. I also want to give you a quote from a market researcher that's, I guess, very respected in that world, called Vision Gain, who said that the Arab Spring uprisings stand to help drive some of the strongest growth rates in homeland security spending in emerging markets over the next 10 years. Why might that be? What is the state of U.S. policing now? Maybe I could just give you a few snapshots to explore that. In 1980, there were 3,000 SWAT raids in all of that year. Right now, in 2012, there were 40,000. Wow. Right? So it's a skyrocketing of that tactic of SWAT raids, which gets to about 100 a day. What do these police forces use when they go on SWAT raids? They use a lot of military hardware, which was explicitly designed for foreign intervention. So armored personnel carriers, like such as Bearcat, which maybe y'all have heard of, they use them in Iraq as well as Afghanistan. They're now in 90 of the 100 largest cities in the U.S. And not just the large cities, though. Last month there was a report that Keene, New Hampshire, population 20,000, acquired one of these armored personnel carriers, right? So it's really becoming an extremely common phenomenon for even relatively small police departments to have these types of weapons. Not just armored personnel carriers, but you know, certain kinds of assault rifles, right? Crowd control devices, and the list goes on. Where do they learn these tactics or make connections with these weapons companies? Well, a consulting firm called the Sitel Group, for now about 8 years, has organized an event called Urban Shield. And Urban Shield is very close to our work because we actually visited Urban Shield this past October 25th in Oakland, and I can talk about that. But Urban Shield is basically a convergence of national police agencies, as well as international ones, where they train and work on mastering these new weapons that they're acquiring, as well as kind of a meet and greet, right? Like how they can coordinate nationally. And there's an initiative called the Urban Area Securities Initiative, which is actually going to have a meeting in Philadelphia this coming May, these numbers of convergences are increasing more and more. So that kind of talks about the tactics, the hardware, the ideas and the gatherings, but there's also this question of normalization, which I think y'all talked about very eloquently, where somehow non-military aspects of life, or non-military companies, let's say, are beginning to interact directly with the Pentagon or weapons manufacturers. So a good example of that, especially considering where we are, is something called the Institute for Non-Lethal Defense Technologies in Penn State. This was founded in 1998, and its explicit mission is to create language for help with the PR on and do the deep, complex research that's required for this process of militarization. So we might wonder and ask, how is the CUNY system or New York area schools involved in this really profitable market now. Finally, there's things that are really not military at all that are directly connected to this process now. So, for instance, there's a bike company that we discovered is making police patrol bikes for police departments on the West Coast called Kona bikes. There's telecommunications companies, of course, that are helping with surveillance. There's college campuses more and more that actually host and sponsor some of these gatherings. So this process is becoming normalized, but let's explore that a little more and try to understand how that happened. So historically, I think we could say that in the U.S., militarization is both new and not new. And here I have a lovely infographic, which I wish was larger, but it tries to show some of the laws that have been evolving over the past 100 years that have got us to where we are today. So a lot of this process can be traced directly to the Reagan era and some of the neoliberal processes also that have been happening in the U.S., and we should explore why. But the war on drugs was key in expanding the weapons, the tactics, and the thinking that go along with the militarization of the police. So in '86, Ronald Reagan declares drugs are a national security threat. National security, we must pull military might to face it. In 1997, the National Defense Authorization Act passes, which means that there's direct transfer from the Pentagon's war chest to police departments for free. So it's not a question of, oh, these police departments are now investing in this. The Pentagon is just carrying weapons, sometimes that are left over from a conflict, or the mass surplus that's built up in preparation for these occupations, and giving them to police departments. So we ask, like, why this small New Hampshire town has armored personnel carriers. It's because the Pentagon gave it to them. And the deeper question might be why that's attractive to small police departments, right? Like, what are they getting out of having this kind of like militarized culture within their department? One more, I think, important example of that too is, like I was saying, these non-lethal weapons companies. So a good example of that is mace. Are you familiar with mace? Not the pepper spray, but the company. It's actually a company which makes pepper spray. So about 2 months ago, Mace went to lobby Capitol Hill so that school guards in high schools can carry mace, because they argued that we need to control, unruly high school students, and a good way to do that, rather than hire extra security guards, is arm them with chemical weapons. Right, so you see that these companies are going directly to the government and pushing this process, which is already, in a very high gear. Let me now describe as a case study the action we did at Urban Shield, and hopefully some of the more hopeful aspects of it, because this has been a pretty dark panel so far. So, like I said, Urban Shield has been going on for several years. Why they chose to do it in Oakland, I think, is worth exploring, because Oakland has such a history of resistance to police violence and resistance in general. But we were drawn to Urban Shield because one of the main sponsors was Safariland. And Safariland is one of the major tear gas manufacturers in the world. They make many other terrible weapons, but that's our window, like we said. They've shipped tear gas to Oakland, Bahrain, Quebec, Istanbul, Mexico City, and St. Paul, Minnesota. So we saw that they were sponsoring it, and then this was an excellent example of what we were saying about the process of militarization. So we started to contact local groups in the Bay Area, and within a couple months, this was about a month before the action itself, 30 different organizations in the Bay Area had supported our action against Urban Shield. Cop Watch Berkeley, Palestine Youth Movement, Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, Arab Resource Organizing Center, Allen Temple Baptist Church, Queer Insurrection, Black Alliance for Just Immigration, the list goes on. But the point there is you could see how incredibly diverse the organizations that wanted to oppose Urban Shield are, and how profound the potential is to face something like this, right? Militarization is extremely unpopular. And when people discover that it's happening in their area, they immediately want to oppose it. Urban Shield was on October 25th. 1 week later, they had another Urban Shield, because it's in Austin. It's expanding into the Midwest as well. They had it in Fort Worth, Dallas area, and we had only discovered their organizing against that after it happened, but organically, about 15 people got together, went to the city council and said, no, we don't want to have this happen here. We don't want people raiding our homes. We don't want this militarized culture happening. So naturally, people are seeing this as a problem, and I think the real challenge that we have is tying it to the history of police violence, right? Because militarization is, these armored personnel carriers, it's these companies, but it's also a state of mind, right? It's the police believe that they are basically there to hold down a community, pacify it, and prevent its resistance. And where it's been going on in black communities, right, in West Oakland, elsewhere, those are the people that have the experience to really lead a movement against it. So I think that helps us imagine how a struggle against militarism is an anti-racist struggle, but it's also one that is necessarily cross-movement, which has great potential to revolutionize the anti-war movement and organizing in the U.S. now.